Hello everyone and welcome to the third in our series of the After the Pandemic and Engineering Together webinars, having our young people from Glasgow and the Tees Valley talking about some very important issues to do with climate change. So today our young people are going to tell us why what their concerns are about the future. If we can do the sort of normal Zoom protocols of those that aren't speaking, please switch their microphones off, and those that aren't on the panel, it would be good if you didn't have your video on. That would be great to allow our panelists to not be distracted. So my name's Paula. The reason why I'm here doing the introduction is I'm chair of Engineering Together, which is an inter-institution group, and we're very much wanting to allow people to use their voices to accelerate change. So with no further delay, I'm going to hand over to our panel chair, Richard McGuckin of Stockton Council, and he'll introduce himself and why he's here and the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much, Paula. Yes, my name is Richard McGuckin and I'm a director here at Stockton-on-Tees Borough Council. I'm actually Director of Town Centres Investment, but I'm a chartered civil engineer by trade, and I've led at a senior level in local government, highways, transport services, housing, planning, environment, climate change and economic growth. So I've got a history of working right across the place in environment agenda, and it's really enthusing for me to engage with young people around what the challenges of society are today and how we can help protect society going forward. In everything I do, I've got the privilege of making and supporting some really major investment decisions that change our public spaces and places for generations to come. And young people have got to be and always are at the forefront of that. It's really important that those changes that we make in society reflect what future generations need and want and deserve from society. So I'm really proud to chair this panel. I'm really proud to play my part in society and help to hold everybody to account for that. I think why am I here? I've probably explained that, and I think I'll give you two examples of things that I've done in my recent career. One is very recent, where we are transforming Stockton Town Centre and removing some significant poor buildings, shopping centres, and creating a large-scale urban park to create new spaces and new reasons for people to come into town centres and create that community and social space, rather than just continuing to build new buildings and burn carbon in that sense. But we've got a lot of legacy in our infrastructure as well as a society, and housing is one of the biggest challenges. And in Stockton here we have a lot of old stock housing, terraced solid wall, very inefficient housing. And a number of years ago we did a programme to externally insulate those houses, and that was effectively wrapping those solid wall, cold damp houses with new modern insulation to try and improve the energy efficiency of those houses. Now that sounds quite simple in today's society, and lots of that is done. What really compelled me in that project and some of the outcomes was not only the fact that those houses became warm, I mean 3,500 across Stockton, but their heating bills went down understandably. So people who were on prepayment meters, who could barely afford to fill those prepayment meters, actually went on to normal electricity tariffs, which is much more affordable. But also that gave them more money for fresh food and for other activities, and also direct health related benefits. So we had one lady in particular who had chronic COPD, and as a result of the measures we made on her house, that condition improved rapidly. So there was a clear benefit between investment in energy efficiency and health benefits. And a further outcome was improvements in school attainment, because people, young people weren't having to sit in cold bedrooms or having to sit in the only room that was warm in the house, but because the whole house was warm, they could sit and actually learn and do their homework in their bedrooms. And those outcomes were identified after some work Northumberland University did on that particular project. And that's just one of those things that I've done in my career that really sort of resonated around some community-wide benefits. So perhaps a little bit off piece from what we are going to talk about today, but I think we're on a journey and we've got a lot of legacy issues to deal with in our society as we look forward. So I'm going to pause there because otherwise I'll probably go all day and I'll move around our panel. So it's very nice to see you all. I'm delighted to hear what you've all got to say. So we're going to move on to Rebekah Clark now, who is on the Zoom call and is from West College, Scotland. Rebekah, do you want to do an introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi there. Okay, so my name's Rebekah and I'm currently studying an Access to Science course at West College of Scotland, just outside Glasgow. So I'm hoping to go on and do medicine after this. So I'm here because I think it's so important to inform the younger generation about these topics because they're the future and they're going to be affected the most about it. So I have put together a small, well, hopefully small, under 5 minutes presentation on global warming and how it affects us, the things we can do to prevent it or aggravate it from getting any worse, and just a bit of a kind of basic overview about what it is. So just gonna share my screen. See if this works. Okay, I think that's it. Okay,
Great.
Is that it? Can you see okay?
That's great, Rebekah. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so a bit about what global warming is. A lot of people hear about it, but they're not 100% sure on what it is. It's a gradual increase in the Earth's temperature. It is caused by something called the greenhouse effect, which is obviously responsible for this. Since 1950, the increase of the global temperature has mostly been caused and aggravated by human activity. So since the Industrial Revolution, which was about 1830, the global temperature has been raised by over 1 degree Celsius. So what is the greenhouse effect? So the greenhouse effect is designed to trap the heat from the sun's rays to keep the planet from becoming warm even when it's cold outside. So our Earth might not be covered in glass like a greenhouse is for plants, but certain molecules in the atmosphere absorb this heat from the sun and trap this heat quite like a glass house would do for those plants. So the molecules in the atmosphere that trap this heat are called the greenhouse gases. So these greenhouse gases include water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous gases, and the fluorinated gases. So what are the main causes of this? So different heat intensities of the sun, which obviously we're not responsible for and we can't exactly change. But the things that we are responsible for is the industrial action, which is the burning of fossil fuels to release energy for electricity, heat, whatever. But it also simultaneously releases, as we all know, CO2 into the atmosphere. The other things that we are responsible for are agricultural actions. So that's like using commercial and organic fertilizers, which obviously at the same time releases the nitrous oxide, and also deforestation. This is a massive one. This is to do with tree clearing, and we've seen so many destruction. There's been so much destruction happening to our wildlife and the forests in the world. And I didn't know this, but apparently a mature tree can absorb CO2 at a rate of 48 pounds per year. So in 1 year, an acre of forest can absorb twice the CO2 produced by the average car's mileage. And we as humans are cutting down on average 3.5 to 7 billion trees a year. So this makes deforestation responsible for up to 15% of the greenhouse gases. So the last one is Earth's own feedback loop. And like the different intensities of the sun, the Earth gets warmer, the more water it can hold. This then results in more clouds and rainstorms. And at the poles, ice is melting and it exposes water. So also because of this, water is less reflective than ice, obviously. So the water absorbs the sun heat and causes the oceans to become warmer, which obviously isn't going to be great for the aqueous ecosystem. So what does this mean for us? So climate change results in all these weather extremes. It's why we're getting warmer summers, why we're getting heavier rainfall, the ice melting, the sea level rising, and also the slow acidification of the ocean, making it uninhabitable to the ecosystem. So what can we do to help? So there's lots of things we as humans can help to limit the use of fossil fuels where humanly possible. So small steps like driving electric cars. So they may actually use fossil fuels to produce the electricity, but they reduce air pollution and they cause significantly fewer greenhouse gases than the normal ordinary petrol or diesel cars. Sounds really simple, but eating more vegetables, because fruit, whole grains and less meat and dairy can significantly lower your environmental impact, which requires less land, water and energy. Saving energy at home, so using electricity less, kind of limiting your use of it, the kind of electricity that's powered by coal, oil and gas. Lowering your heating, so that's like putting your things like your washing on in a colder wash, avoiding using like tumble dryers, hanging your washing out, which obviously I know living in Scotland for us anyway, that's not really an option sometimes because it rains all the time. Stuff like switching to LED bulbs and just using energy efficient appliances. So one of the last two things you can do is walk, cycle and take the public transport, because this just reduces the amount of cars on the road. When you're using public transport, you're killing two birds with one stone, as we like to say. And it reduces the amount of cars on the road. Just walking and cycling, just making sure that we're reducing the fumes that come for cars. And lastly, recycling. I didn't realize how much we produce when we are buying things like clothes. Like factories produce so much pollution, but just by like creating these clothes for us. So stuff like recycling electronics, clothes, shopping in charity shops, repairing your clothes instead of just throwing them out, and then buying secondhand as much as you can instead of obviously buying and using stuff like fast fashion. So yeah, that's everything I've got to talk to today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was excellent, and some really poignant questions posed there. I think we're all familiar with, but they are the big questions, and that's where the big answers are needed, aren't they? So we'll perhaps come to a little bit more of that after everybody's presented in the session. So we now move to Helena Keane from Middlesbrough College. Helena.
Hi, so I'm Helena. I'm from Middlesbrough College, studying chemistry, biology, and philosophy and ethics at A level. So I think them three work really well together for what we're discussing, because obviously it's to do with the climate and the planet and how our environment works, but also we can look at more of the ethical sides of it, which I think is very important. I'm planning on studying more of environmental science at uni, so I can kind of make a difference, but also widen my knowledge of this topic, because I don't claim to know everything about it. You know, you can, but I mean, it's important to definitely widen your knowledge on it if you can. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to do this, because I think that young people now, everyone's eager to know, but there's not necessarily the opportunities for everyone to learn about climate change. We all kind of know the science, you know, in exams and in school, but what your actual everyday effects that you have, it's much more difficult to actually know your consequences. So yeah, I think it's really important to help people understand that it's actually not that hard to make the small differences. So say, seeing adverts recently, there's these new washing tablets that you can wash your clothes with on a cold wash. So like little changes like that people might not necessarily be aware of, that can actually make a massive difference, like using less energy, being just more resourceful in general. But yeah, I think it's very important. And so yeah, I think if we help younger people to be able to plan for the future, then it'll make it much easier when we get there. Rather than waiting around for like the government or politicians to do something, because when we get there, then we'll already kind of have a plan and be in the know about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Helena. Question from me. You're going to go and study hopefully environmental science. Do you think you'd like to work in the field of carbon reduction, climate change? Do you think that's
Yeah, I
something?
think something like that, definitely more
Yeah.
research based on the environment and
Yeah.
want to help.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really important, isn't it? And spread the messages as wide as possible. Yeah, right, great. Thank you, Helena. Okay, we're now going to move back up to Scotland, and we've got Sharon-Lee who's going to take us through her introduction. Sharon-Lee.
Hi, so I'm Sharon-Lee. I am a graduate town planner and I've just finished a master's in housing. I know that sounds made up, but I promise it is real. I got a scholarship from the Construction Innovation Centre, so that's kind of why I'm here. I think it's really important that we hear from young people about these issues that affect us a lot more than those in cabinet positions or those able to actually make policy changes. For example, Michael Gove, I mean, who even is he? What does he know about housing? But anyway, I've been looking at sustainable communities, and one of the major issues with the current planning system is that it's not really fit for purpose. Not only can it take over 8 weeks to have a dropped curb application determined, with the backlog coupled with from COVID and councils taking several months to determine simple applications like an extension or even a garden room, it's not really fit for purpose. Whilst the technological advances such as the planning portal has brought planning into the 2000s, it's still 20 years behind in the technology that we've got available to use. Public consultation models are really out of date. A lot of people don't know about them, they don't understand, and quite frankly, they don't want to go to a town meeting in a stuffy public hall for 2 hours on a Wednesday night. We should have moved on to a sort of online model well before the pandemic. And as easy as it is for people to lodge planning objections online if, for example, their neighbour's building an extension, the issue is that people don't know about it when it matters. So, for example, in Edinburgh, there's a lot of purpose-built student accommodation blocks that are really taking off just now. And in sort of typically working class residential area, a particular example would be Gorgie. This has seen a huge increase in these purpose-built blocks. And this caught the attention of a sort of, I don't know what they're called, a group called Living Rent. They sort of advocate for tenants, and they collected signatures on a petition which gathered a lot of support in the community to oppose against this student development. But actually on the planning portal, there was very few objections in comparison to the signatures that they got. So this essentially made the effort worthless because people aren't making their voices heard where it needs to be. And I mean, this area is not going to benefit from this massive influx of student housing. What they would benefit from is social and affordable housing. This would foster a far more sustainable community, and rather than a group who'll live there for 9 months of the year before then moving on to private rented flats for the rest of their years of study. Another sort of red flag for me is the difference between each sort of district council or local councils and their approach to their local plans. So there's a certain council in England who I won't name, but they actually haven't updated their local plans since the early 90s. Now, if your local plans are older than the planners who are using it, that's not really acceptable. Another issue I suppose I have is any sort of house building that we're doing now, it's already a decade too late. And we've got new challenges such as an aging population and the housing crisis. And it's only going to get worse unless we simplify the housing system, the planning system, sorry, for organisations such as social housing providers or even local councils to create and then manage council stock. Both the council and the government really needs to work more proactively. There's a lot of talk, but not a lot's happening on the ground. And we need to see a new approach to land supply and housing supply so that we can make genuine action in reducing the housing crisis. As well, I think we need to hold private housing developers to account. A lot of the time they have a minimum standard of social housing per development, but they're not doing it. Either it's too expensive for them, or they want to give the council some money to provide this off-site. And why should they get away with that? They should be building the minimum in each development, making sure it's tenure blind and reducing the stigma that social housing has. The most environmentally friendly buildings are ones that we've already built. We need to ensure that councils are responsible in terms of their maintenance and repairs, especially within working class estates, which face a lot of stigma for the state of their estates, but it tends to be the council's fault for letting them fall into disrepair. And this is essentially managed decline, and it's irresponsible and damaging not only to these working class communities, but also the environment. So instead of demolishing run-down working class areas of housing to make way for new luxury houses, we need to make sure that we maintain areas, make them greener, let's retrofit and foster a sense of community. We need to have more local community gardens, allotments, and encourage through education and activities a new greener approach to living and working within our existing communities. And that's my rant for today.
That's great, thank you, Sharon-Lee. And a lot of that resonates with me, as you'd expect, a director who has been in charge of planning as well as other things. I'm familiar with the challenges local government have with planning and how frustration it really can be for residents and for developers and councils. It's about national reform, isn't it, to get some teeth into the planning system. And if we're serious about climate change and carbon reduction, it's got to go hand in hand. You talked about housing and new house building and technologies, and yes, the housing numbers are 10 years behind, but the technology is 100 years behind as well, in my view. And I think there's strides that we can make collectively, you know, as we regenerate, recreate, and add to our communities for the future. Housing has got to be fit for everybody and fit for the climate as well. So, and our local plan was done in 2019. So just for the record, it's not Stockton-on-Tees that I've got a local plan. But thank you, Sharon-Lee. That was really interesting. Okay, and we're back down to Tees Valley now. So we've got Chloe Armstrong from Middlesbrough College again. Chloe.
Thank you. I'm Chloe. I'm studying biology, psychology, and maths at Middlesbrough College, and I'm hoping to go and do psychology at uni next year, hopefully. And the reason I'm here is I want to raise awareness within the local community about what small actions we can take to improve our environment, as well as like kind of not annoy the politicians and the rest of the government, but you know, get them involved in actually doing something about the environment instead of just making promises to do things by 2050 instead of taking action now, which is what we need to keep on track with the warming of the planet. We need to do something now rather than wait 10, 15 years to do something. And I'm also at college, I'm also winning the Environmental Society at college. So within that, we've done things like get reusable cups for the college and to reduce our outgoing waste. We've looked at efficiency with lighting within the college as well. So they've had lights change from halogen to LEDs within the last year. We work with them, or we work with the hospitality community within our college, and we've got environmental officers that we take our ideas to, and we get them to do something about it within the college to improve our carbon footprint.
That's excellent, and that's about real action at all levels, isn't it? And I think your comment about holding politicians to account, so you can use those words, I'm using those words, but you know, as we live in a democracy, that starts at the ballot box, but it also starts with action speaks louder than words as well, doesn't it? Yeah. And we've seen a lot of that, haven't we, in COP26, not only in Glasgow, but around the country. You know, people feel moved to move and do something about it. That's how serious the climate emergency is, and that's how serious people want to take it. So I think that's great, and like you say, in your own little corner of the world, wherever that is for all of us, if you can do your bit, but also, you know, make sure that we act collectively, that's the best way forward. Great, thank you, Chloe. So just pause in a second. Have we got something in the chat? Because I know we're going to take questions and things.
Why don't we?
I wasn't going to pause for it. I was
Yeah.
just making sure that if
Yeah.
anybody does have any questions that are hot in their mind, use the chat and we'll pick them up as we finish. So we've got Sophie, Coffey. Again, we're jumping back up north over the water. Sophie.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Sophie. I'm doing a PhD in electrical engineering at the University of Strathclyde. Though I am from Belfast, if you can't understand my accent, just tell me to speak slower and more clearly. I'm here today because my research is in MVDC, which is medium voltage DC electricity, which will hopefully aid in the integration of renewable energies, which I'll get on into a minute. And so my academic interest is very much in preventing climate change, integrating renewables, and trying to prepare our grid for the future systems. And also I want to always focus on marrying my academic life and my personal interests in climate change and making sure that every part of my life really thinks what is my own responsibility in tackling climate change and holding those who are in power to account for what we need to do to make sure that we stay under the 1.5 degrees limit. I also want to talk to other young people and understand what is the common understanding of what we can do and what the threat is, because I think was it Helena said that it's sometimes hard to find the information, and I do think that we need to discuss with young people what we need to be taught in schools, what needs to be highlighted to make us sure that everyone is as aware as they can be. So my research is in medium voltage DC, and our current grid system uses AC. However, I'm looking into the effect if we change to direct current, that has a higher transfer capacity, so we can therefore allow for more power to be transmitted into densely populated urban cities. This will help with the electric revolution, as we know we're trying to increase electricity capacity to ensure that transport and heating can be electrified, to ensure to move away from fossil fuel sources, which obviously contribute to climate change. And if we can increase our capacity this way, hopefully that will help us reach some of our targets. Relating back to town planning, I think everyone's made really valid points, and I really think I really agree with Sharon-Lee in talking about facing the injustices in climate change and social housing. And I think in regards to climate change and town planning, we really will see the effects of climate change in our cities in the next decade. And it'll be very important to look into how to prevent flooding in certain areas and make sure that our cities are prepared for extreme weather events that we might have and have to face due to climate change, which due to climate injustice generally is the poorer in society who have to deal with the effects of climate change and not see any help. We've seen it in America with the latest hurricanes in Louisiana and people not getting the support. And I think it's something that town planning will really need to focus on in the next few years, ensuring that people in society, all parts of society and class, are looked after when we see the effects of climate change becoming more and more prevalent. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Yeah, and that sort of your last point there on climate change adaptation, as I suppose I would term it, is something that we've seen here in Stockton for real, where we've had 1 in 100-year flooding events that happened with far greater frequency than anticipated, and existing flood defences, weren't up to scratch, and as a result, houses were flooded, and the investment has followed, which is great. But it just shows how vulnerable we are. And like you say, we see it in the news in some quite extreme circumstances. It's interesting, isn't it, around AC and DC, and a lot of the things that we plug in, like our mobile phones and our laptops, actually run on DC, but we plug them into AC to try to I'm not technical in electrical engineering, but to sort of take the voltage down. So we're using power to reduce the power, which is absolute madness. Also, I want to throw in the mix is nuclear. We perhaps saw on the news yesterday around the next generation of smaller nuclear reactors that are effectively fit in a shipping container, and whether, you know, the important role that nuclear might have to play in our future to achieve climate targets is kind of as challenging as nuclear can be. But again, there's a range of issues, big decisions and things to be considered there, isn't it? So great, thank you, Sophie. So in terms of chat, we've got some chat. What's the chat, Paula?
So somebody, Paul had said in the chat that he was very surprised by the level of differences in planning laws between England and Scotland. I think that's mostly for Sharon-Lee.
So I do only sort of practice planning in England, but one of my issues with the sort of planning in Scotland is more at the local level. So in England, you can have neighbourhood plans, and the councils, I believe, have a responsibility to help create these neighbourhood plans. Now, in Scotland, we're a bit behind. We're only starting to introduce these. There's currently a pilot in a really deprived neighbourhood in Edinburgh. It's on the periphery of the city, and they're only now sort of creating a neighbourhood plan. They are getting some help and some funding, but the issue is it's not enough, and not enough people are able to get involved and actually have their voices heard. So we've seen it all over the cities, and it's essentially going to lead to gentrification. The current residents, they will get moved on. Their houses will get knocked down. They'll be replaced with luxury flats that look like everyone else's flats. That sense of community that has been fostered over 60 years, that's going to go. And yeah, I think that's my main difference between planning in England and Scotland. Scotland, we talk a lot of talk about community and how it really matters, but there's not that action on ground level.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon-Lee. I mean, I'll add a little bit to that. I don't know the differences in Scotland in planning, but I do know there are stark differences around local authority powers between England and Scotland. Scottish councils can do a lot more things than English councils in terms of commercial trading, for example, and bringing in income. So that it does effectively act as two different countries in that sense, which but with kind of a common nation and a common outcome, you'd expect it to be a lot closer, but it isn't. And Wales is different again, and Northern Ireland different again as well. So yeah,
Mental really for such a small country.
it is, and that's about yeah, we won't get into debates about union and independence and all those sort of things.
So there's another question in the chat, and it's for everybody. So if Richard decides on who's going to answer sort of first, but if each of you could sort of ask someone in power, your local politicians, your local authority, or even your school or university to do just one thing, what would that one thing be?
Have we got any hands up? Have we got anybody that's keen to jump in with an answer? Sophie.
My one thing would be to stop investing in fossil fuels.
Great, thank you, Sophie. Right, we're going to go around then. Sharon-Lee.
Get rid of private property rights.
Okay, I'll jump into the room. Helena.
Start planning for now rather than in 30 years. And do some things, even if it's just small, act now rather than later.
Yeah.
It's a different time.
Yeah, I think that's important. Chloe, was there anything?
And thinking on to that, at the moment on the beaches in our area, the water companies are really dumping all of
Yes.
their waste into the sea, and all the animals and the creatures in the sea are dying washing up on our beaches. So I'd really like to see them find the source of that and take people accountable for it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there was something on the news again a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember where it was now, but it was discharging for 49 hours in direct sewage into the sea, which obviously has a devastating impact. Thanks, Chloe. Right, who else have we got? Rebecca?
I feel like the schools, particularly high schools, should be educating us all more on global warming, climate change, how it happens and stuff. Instead, information needs to be more accessible and it needs to be more of a priority. I just feel like they kind of just leave you to it, and if you've got an interest, you just research it yourself rather than it be taught in the curriculum.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Paula, what about you?
What thing would I do? Honestly, I'd start taxing the things that are really, really bad and start putting the excess taxes into things that are really, really good. But then with that, it needs to be fair. So we can't have people that are already struggling to struggle even further. So part of that money also has to go into the social funds to allow, well, basically people that work for a living shouldn't have to go to food banks, and things are only going to cost more going forward. So rather than wait until it happens as a result of droughts and floods and things like that, why don't we just bite the bullet and just say, well, we'll increase the cost of things now by taxes and actually use that money to offset some of the problems, and that's what I would do.
Of course, all of these problems are shrouded in political will, aren't they? And political cycles are quite short, and politicians, need to make decisions that are longer term, that are perhaps beyond their own tenure, and that's always a challenge for them. Yeah. Which we all understand, but we need action. Do we think that when legislation comes in, and I think a good example is electric and diesel cars. So by 2030, or 20, I can't remember, is it 2030 or 2040, that there'll be no diesel, all diesel or all electric cars have to be hybrid. And I'm sure it's 2030. It's 2030, isn't it? But then we've seen an incredible response from the industry, and every car advert I see on TV now is just an electric car, because that's what's cool and that's what people are connecting with. And you are really seeing a sea change, or I think I am, and that's really working. And I think there was an announcement, was it this morning, that the UK by 2040 would have all road haulage transport would be battery electric only. So legislation, it does demonstrate that legislation can work. It does work because it has to work, but markets respond to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple of things that sort of to do with legislation, things that people thought would never happen, not being able to smoke inside public buildings, for example. Right? Everybody knew for years and years and years that smoking was bad. And I personally thought when they brought in the laws that lots of people would go against it and still smoke and say, I've done it for however many years when I've had my friends and I still smoke. But they didn't, because the law, two things. One, the law stopped them, but two, everybody knew in their heart of hearts that it was wrong to be smoking inside a public place next to somebody that wasn't smoking. Everybody now, I think, wasn't the same 5 years ago, but everybody now knows in their heart of hearts we need to make some difficult decisions. So for me, the people that are making those laws need to actually put them in place, because then it'll happen. And people, I can't remember who it was that said, people don't choose to actually make decisions that cost them more money and time. Unfortunately, I don't think big changes are going to happen until the policies are actually in place. So a question for everybody then. So what is your sort of, so going back to that same question then, with that conversation in mind, would you change your mind on one thing you would ask your politicians to do? Would anyone have changed their mind? Or would you think of something else? No. So what's your biggest concern then for the future?
Right, we'll go around again. Sophie, I'm going to start with you again.
I'd say definitely climate change. I can't think of anything else that is going to have as big an impact on our lives. I think combined with that is a sort of a reluctance of input from those in power and the continued allowance for those in power to get away with doing whatever it is they want, avoiding tax, preventing that from contributing to actual solutions that we could fight climate change with. I think we need to fight and make sure that those who have wealth and power can be held to account, and so that they can stop being the biggest contributors to global warming, and actually make sure that we have a chance to not live under the sea.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, two of the biggest contributors are COP on a global scale, but we've got to start somewhere. We've got to.
Well, I think in terms of that, like China, as I don't know if you're allowed to mention countries, but China are not there, yes, and I do think that, you know, obviously authoritarian regimes not good, but one of the biggest reasons that China has such a large contribution to CO2 output is because of Western countries buying products from there. We are the biggest consumers that we purchase produce from China. The UK and America don't produce stuff in our own country, but we buy an awful lot. We are countries that live in excess, and I think it's sometimes a bit hypocritical for, you know, Joe Biden in our country, our leaders, to go on and say, China, you're not here whenever you have produced all this waste, whenever they're producing it, because we are buying in the products and also exporting all our waste to China, which produces CO2. And we're just not dealing with our projects, and we're going, look, we have wind turbines, we're wonderful, whenever we're just closing the back door and everything that we are doing secretly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Sharon-Lee, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Oh, sorry. I'm reading the wrong part, so I do apologise. What's your biggest concern for the future?
I suppose, just to add on to Sophie's point about climate change, is that it's going to happen, and as much as individual actions and responsibilities are important, it doesn't really matter if I drive a diesel car but Shell are pouring oil into the sea. I mean, we do really need to hold these massive corporations and governments to account. It doesn't matter if my neighbour doesn't recycle. It does small scale, but bigger scale, there is so much more to do.
Yeah, of course. And greenwashing is a phrase that's kind of emerged, hasn't it? Well, certainly recently for me anyway, but there was some TV coverage, wasn't there, of sort of using big companies like Shell as the example, where greenwashing, the reality of their green agenda is far away by their mainstream business, which is carbon heavy, and it's about holding those players to account.
I mean, even closer to home as well, we've got raw sewage being thrown into rivers, maybe closer to your home than mine, but that's, again, a corporation, and that's a choice that the government have made. But yeah, who's going to be held accountable for that?
Absolutely. Good questions. Thank you, Sharon. We'll stay on screen for the question. Rebecca, what is your biggest concern for the future?
Pretty much the same as what Sophie was saying. Like, it's great that we're all making small changes, and they do matter, but the bigger corporations like China, they're just not, they're the main thing that we need to get to stop doing what they're doing. And I feel like we're kind of supporting them. So why are they going to stop if they're going to keep getting the support from us in terms of buying and giving? It's just, the bigger corporations need to take notice, and it's frightening the fact that they're hiding from it, like China not coming to COP. That's frightening.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, well made by both of you. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, we'll go this way, Chloe.
My biggest concern would be the countries that haven't yet gone through their industrial revolution like we did. We're hundreds of years in front of these other countries. who are yet to develop as much as we have, yet we're putting the blame on the other countries that are still producing a lot of carbon emissions, yet we have the resources and money to stop and reduce our carbon emissions, but they don't have the resources for it yet. And they're going to be the ones most impacted by climate change and extreme weather.
Yeah, and again, that's something that's really pertinent on the news at the moment. The discussion is around those poorest countries who do need to develop, but can't, and are suffering. And it's got to be that balance of wealth and resource, hasn't it, around to make sure that everybody has those opportunities. Yeah, that's a great point, Chloe. Helena, what about you?
I think in regards to climate change, one of my main worries is just inaction, because obviously we're slowly building and there is massive plans, which obviously we're all grateful for, that people are starting to make an effort, but in the grand scheme, I think I'm a bit worried that there's stuff being done but not enough, because we really don't have enough time for what we need to do. And I think especially say like the low-income countries, if we all group together to make this big effort to reduce climate change, that would be great, and that would probably be much faster. But we have to allow time for some countries to develop in themselves to improve the well-being of the people who live there, because where they live, they can't be focusing on recycling and things like that and being vegetarian, because that's not a possibility for them. So I think the time that we have is very limited, because we can't expect everyone to be able to be climate conscious, because although the little changes can be made, it is a bit more expensive because industries haven't caught up with the times. They are still, say, fast fashion, diesel cars, things like that still are being produced. We're still being coerced into doing it. So I just think it is a bit tricky for, so say for example, fast fashion, that's cheaper. Low-income households can buy more expensive clothes that last them longer, but they can't be blamed for that, which is why it's tricky, because we just need to act now. Like, we need to make a change and we need the government's help with that, but they're aiming for more in the future, but things need to change now.
Thank you. That's really poignant in terms of what's going on at the moment. I'm going to come back to that because there's kind of the broad point I want to make.
Yeah.
Paul, what about you?
Can I pick up on two of the points that people have sort of brought up in that sort of talking about their concerns? One was that comparison between sort of personal changes and big companies and things. And absolutely and utterly, the big hitters, which will mainly be changed by policy and law, will no longer be allowed to do it, will make the most significant change. But just think of it this way: all of our everyday decisions that we make, things that we buy, the things that we use, all contribute to that massively, because these big companies only make what we buy, right? That's a really key point, and policymakers only make policies that they think the public will get behind them on. So don't underestimate the power of your voice and the power of your spending decisions, however small, because that will influence what will be available in the future. If people can't sell it, they won't make it. Yeah. And then the other thing to do is about fairness. So those of us that are in a privileged position to make them good choices, in my mind, have a duty to, whether it be on a personal level and you're choosing what jumper to buy next, or whether it be on a country level and deciding what you should do. And again, waiting for the other countries shouldn't be a stopping block. If we all wait for each other, nothing's ever going to happen. And one of the key points to do with a lot of the things that the activists are asking for is about a fair transition, is to actually balance that books. And if you look back at Paris 15, the things that came out of there, the agreements that came out of there, was to actually keep some of our carbon, to basically our carbon budget for somewhere like the UK would be less, because there's an acknowledgement that we've created more of the problem and that we've got this requirement to reduce it, because certain countries like Africa need to come up to spec with basic infrastructure, and so therefore they need a lot of the global carbon budget, and it's only fair to allow them to have some of ours. And that's something that we should all keep in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kathleen's put a question in the chat I've just seen, which I think is a great one to raise. So let's give a couple of minutes to that. How does social media play a role in educating and organising folks on climate change? And is it worth the mental health effects of climate and anxiety? I think that's a really great point. Does anybody want to respond to that? Well, pick on you all if you don't want to. That does make sense. Rebekah, I'm going to randomly come to you. Rebekah, are you there?
Frozen.
Versus there. What do you think about social media and its role in organising, promoting, but then also the sort of mental health effects?
I think, yes, it is worth it, because I feel like we need to not cause anxiety, but I think it really needs to hit home to the young ones anyway, just how important this is, and how I think it was how short time we've got to just really, and the thing is, social media is where everyone's at right now. It's what everyone uses. So as much as we can raise awareness on that platform and we're reaching every single young person on there, I think it's important. And I think if it does induce feelings of anxiety, then I guess that not positive in the sense, but it just kind of shows just how important it is and how much we need to just do to really get the ball rolling and help be a part of the change.
Yeah, absolutely. What about in the room, Helena?
I almost wish that climate anxiety was less of a thing for people who necessarily can't make the big changes, but if more politicians in the government had much bigger climate anxiety, that would probably make much more of a difference, because if they had the anxiety that we do, then there would probably be a bit more action, and it would show that more of a passion for our climate change, and it would show that they are actually bothered rather than just answering people's calls, I think.
Okay, yeah. Chloe, about social media?
It's good because if we didn't have it, not everyone would know what's going on. So none of us would have got behind Greta. Is it Greta?
Greta Thunberg,
None
yeah.
of us would have got behind her without Twitter or Instagram. It's good for raising awareness, even with documentaries on Netflix, things about like meat consumption, dairy consumption. There was one, was a Seaspiracy, whatever.
Yeah, I watched that.
The one about the amount of fish and the sustainability behind it. None of us would know any more information than the normal person if social media wasn't about. And it creates good anxiety rather than, not good in a way, but more of a like a pressing matter, like we need to change now rather than just wait for someone else to sit around and do it.
It keeps that meaning, doesn't it? Thanks, Chloe. Sharon-Lee, any thoughts on social media?
I suppose if we don't get scared, then we're gonna die. I don't know who it was who said this, but someone said fear is the currency of control. So the more people that are scared, the more action that will happen. And I think we should be scared because it's going to happen anyway. Yeah, we should have acted yesterday to stop it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well put, Sharon. Thank you. Sophie, any comments or thoughts from you?
Yes, no, I agree with that. I think it is, and I find it like very hard. Like every day, I'm thinking about climate change, and every day, I think it's very personal into how you sort of create your social media feed, which is another discussion in itself, and the dangers of having social media directly what you think. But my feed is sort of a balance between people who are offering solutions and people who are raising awareness. I think it's all about making sure that you have that, the people telling you we've got this and this issue, but then also you're listening to the people who say, but we could do this, to stay positive about it. But I think it's very important to just have that social media awareness in general, with different opinions that are challenging yours on climate change, in the sense that I know that there's that debate, as we were saying, about like fast fashion and the affordability aspect of that. But I've stopped purchasing fast fashion for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and I haven't noticed the change. And as you're saying, like Paula, about how it is our consumerist actions that, although I was trying to say earlier about how China are polluting, but it's us who are purchasing the issues, so we can't blame, although I'm very angry at large corporations and those in power, it is us who are still purchasing those products we don't need at such a consumerist rate. And I think we need social media to inform us of this and make us question our own opinions and say that, well, maybe although we are fast fashion, it might be something you can afford either one good pair of jeans or 4 items of clothing. And yes, it's we do live in a very class society where there are a lot of people who aren't that wealthy. We're still more well off than the children who are making the clothes in Singapore or Malaysia for you, who are living in poverty, and it's not at their expense that you should be purchasing clothing just because it's at a cheaper rate. I think it's things like that I've learned from social media to really question my own responsibility a lot more.
Yeah, no, it's really powerful. Thank you, Sophie. I know there was a question in the chat from Paul around what do we think we can do to help young people feel genuinely empowered to make a real significant difference where they live. We're not going to have time to get into that in terms of answers, but I think I will leave you with my reflections just for a minute or so, and then I'll pause and hand to Paula. But I think I said it at the start, engagement with young people, with politicians and with people that are in power to influence local decisions, and I include myself in that, is the way forward. And I think through COP, not just COP, but COP shone a spotlight on it, that actually people do care and young people do have a voice and young people do have a movement and can demonstrate change. And it's not just Greta, because she gets the headlines. It's the people sat in this room and the people sat on the screen in their rooms there. I can see the passion, I can feel it, it's real, and I know that my future is safe in your hands because you and many, many others like you are really driving that change. And change will have to come because young people won't tolerate it. We won't tolerate what we've got now. And I think if there's one thing I'm going to take away from this, it's reassurance that my future is safe in your hands, certainly. So I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions. It's been an energising hour, really informative, really powerful, and I wish you all the very best of luck in your climate endeavours, but also your broader endeavours. And if there's ever anything I can do to try and help, well, find me on LinkedIn or anything, and or talk to me through Paula, and I'll gladly support in any way I can. So thank you, and over to you, Paula.
So thank you very much. As Richard said, there was a lot of great discussion there. So the purpose of today was to think about sort of what future those of us in older generations will leave for yourselves, the younger generations. And to address to wrap up some of them sort of final questions, climate anxiety is something that we should all have, because there is no doubt about it, it's a problem. But in order to offset any problem, being part of the solution makes you feel better. So the question that we sort of didn't quite get to was, how can you feel genuinely empowered to make a significant difference where you live? And doing things like this, having conversations, really, really matters. Don't underestimate what value your voice actually brings to the table. So Paul's popped into the chat an RSA event about young green democracy, if you'd like to have a look at that, and that's something that you may be interested in. And also one of the things that were mentioned a few times was the lack of education, or maybe the suitability of education within organisations. And we've got quite a few different educational organisations here, not just one in one country or one place. We do have the final in our series, an Engineering Together and After the Pandemic webinar in 2 weeks' time about exactly that. Is the education being taught currently fit for the future? And Chloe will join us again for that one. So with no further delay, I'll say thank you very much to everybody that's partaken, whether it's listened in, whether it's added questions into the chat, or especially our panelists and our panel chair. So thank you everybody, and this will be available on the After the Pandemic YouTube, so we can spread our voices even further and keep up the good work, everyone. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.